Metro Exodus is one of the most immersive and atmospheric games I have ever played. Yep, that's the whole intro. Usually I try to make my intros about a paragraph long, but I think that sentence is all I really need to say. This genuinely is one of the most immersive games I think I've ever played. So let's jump straight into the meat and potatoes and have a look at the development of this game. Oh, and I'm still sick, so throughout this video I may sound like I've got a mouthful of cum, but I can assure you I've left my homosexual acts in the past. Unfortunately, I couldn't find much on this game's development. The only information on the development cycle I could find are a few offhand remarks from reviews for the game saying that 4A were experiencing a lot of technical issues and had resorted to crunch to get the game out on time. I'm not 100% sure how true these statements are, as like I said, they were just offhand comments from other reviewers, but judging by the other two Metro games having similar issues in the buggy state that this game initially released in, it's not unbelievable. So, onto the gameplay. But before diving into that, I first want to mention that there are two different versions of this game, the normal version and the enhanced edition. I initially started playing on the enhanced edition because I just figured it was like other enhanced editions I've played in the past, where it's just a slight graphical upgrade. And since when you buy the game you get both versions, I just thought that I may as well install the better looking one. What I later found out is that the enhanced edition's improved graphics requires a lot of ray tracing, which my PC just couldn't handle. This obviously isn't the game's fault. The Steam store page even has this big enhanced edition paragraph on it. I just didn't read it and wasted a few hours of my life trying to figure out why the game was so laggy and didn't want anyone else doing the same thing. However, there is one thing in the Enhanced Edition that should 100% be in both versions. An FOV slider. This game came out in 2019 for fuck's sake. This isn't a game from like 2008 where FOV sliders were starting to become standard on PC, but a lot of games still didn't have them. In 2019, they had been standard for almost a decade by this point, and were even starting to make their way onto consoles. It's pretty egregious the normal version of this game doesn't have one. Since we just talked about something the game doesn't have, let's talk about something it does have. Mouse acceleration and motion blur you can't turn off. You can fortunately change these issues by fucking around with some game files, but I do need to mention how bad this mouse acceleration is. When I first started playing, I genuinely thought my game was bugged or my mouse was broken. When it comes to actual gameplay, however, there isn't much I can complain about. There is of course the occasional visual bug which can sometimes be annoying, which is something the other two games have had in them as well. Other than that, I did notice the enemies seemed a bit dumber during stealth sections. In previous games, if you were standing out in the open underneath a spotlight that was pointing at you, you would get spotted very quickly. But in this game, it seems like it takes a really long time for enemies to spot you. I have a feeling that they did this to make stealth during the day viable, but it has the downside of making stealth at night very easy. This leads me into one of the biggest changes this game makes compared to the other two, that being the game is open world. Or I suppose a more correct term would be semi-open world. You see, the game starts us off in a similar level structure to the older games, then it puts us into an open world environment, then the game goes back to being a bit more linear before putting you into a different open world environment. I think having these linear levels in between and putting you in completely different looking open world sections stops this game from going stale, and all these environments are beautiful to both look at and explore. Another noticeable change 4A made in this game is slowing the gameplay down. This is particularly noticeable when you get into an actual gunfight, as enemies do a fair bit more damage, which incentivizes you to actually take cover a lot more than in the other two games. This change is either good or bad depending on what type of games you like. For example, people who like games like Ready or Not will probably think Exodus is the best Metro game, whereas people who like games like Call of Duty or Halo will probably like the other two more. For me personally, I like this change, but I will say that Exodus would really benefit with some type of leaning mechanic, so that you aren't just staring at a wall whenever you're taking cover and fully exposing yourself when shooting from cover. They also added a weapon jamming mechanic where if your gun is dirty, it will deal less damage and jam. If your weapon is dirty enough, you will sometimes have to unjam it after every shot. This mechanic just adds to the overall atmospheric and immersive vibe I was talking about earlier. Whilst we're on the subject of weapons, 4A seems to have had a main focus on expanding weapon customization. Unlike in previous Metro games where weapon customization was very basic, Exodus has a more in-depth weapon customization system that allows you to customize your guns to suit your preferences as a player, with attachments having both positive and negative effects. This focus on customization is the unfortunate downside of weapons from previous games not appearing in this one. For example, one of my favourite looking weapons, the Bi-Gun, isn't in the game at all. As a matter of fact, Exodus actually has the least number of guns in the entire series, even less than the first game did. Anyway, I think that's all I can really say about the gameplay, so how about we look at the game's story? Like the last two games, you play as Artyom, who explains to us at the beginning of the game he wants to find a habitable place on the surface of the nuclear-ridden world and lead all of his people out of the metro to go live there. During one of his expeditions to the surface with his now wife, Anna, they witness a train running on the surface. Artyom and Anna decide to follow the train, but are captured by a group of Hansa soldiers. In the Hansa soldiers' car, there is an old woman and a boy who claims to come from a village about 200 kilometers outside of Moscow. The Hansa soldiers try to execute the outsiders, but Artyom steps in to stop them, but this ends up failing as Artyom gets shot and the prisoners die anyway. Artyom of course survives the shooting because it's the beginning of the game, so he has major plot armor. Artyom follows the Hansa soldiers back to their base to save Anna, and whilst doing so meets a fellow named Yermak who is willing to help them. During the escape attempt from the Hansa forces, Artyom accidentally destroys a communications jammer which is blocking all communications from Moscow to the outside world. This also proves Artyom's theory that there are in fact people outside of Moscow that survived the war. Artyom, Yermak and Anna escape the Hansa facility by stealing their train, which they later named the Aurora. As the train leaves, the Order moves in to retake it, and it just so happens the Spartans that retake the train are led by Anna's father Miller, and the rest of the squad are really good friends with Anna and Artyom. You're actually introduced to these guys earlier in the game, so I'll just go through quickly and introduce them now. In the squad, we have Aloysia, Demir, Duke, Idiot, Sam, Stepan, and Tokarev. Anyway, Miller says that Hansa will kill them all for knowing the truth about the people outside of Moscow, and concludes that their best chance is to flee the city. Once outside the city, Miller reveals the truth that the war is actually still going on, and the reasons for the jammer in Moscow was to hide them from possible occupying NATO forces. Miller then orders Artyom to use the radio to look for a transmission from a place called the Ark. Miller explains the Ark project is in a bunker in Mount Yamantau, and its purpose is for rebuilding the Russian government, and a lot of Russia's leaders went there when the war started. On their way to the Ark, they are forced to stop for repairs at the Volga River, which just so happens to be an area that is controlled by a technophobic cult and a big-ass catfish. During your stay in this area, you save a woman named Katya and her daughter Nastya from the cult, and also recruit a mechanic named Crest. Oh, and whilst here, Anna falls into an old bunker and is exposed to AIDS or something. After making your way past the cult, the group reaches the Ark. However, instead of finding salvation, they find everyone in the Ark have evolved into cannibals who lure survivors in with promises of safety. After Artyom and the Spartans fight their way out, Miller is enraged with the realization that the war did actually end, and the Russian government was nothing but a hoax that Hansa made up to gain control of the metro. Whilst in the Ark, the group recovered a map which they used to get to the Caspian Sea in hopes to get a different map which shows the radiation levels in certain areas. They plan on using this map to find a habitable piece of land to settle down. Upon arriving at the Caspian Sea, they realize that the area is controlled by bandits who have enslaved the local population, and end up getting caught up in freeing these slaves. Artyom eventually gets the map, and the group leave the area for a forest valley that seems suitable to live in. Artyom and Aloysia are sent on a scouting mission into this valley that goes tits up, separating the two and making them lose contact with the Aurora. After regrouping with everyone, Artyom finds that Anna's AIDS has gotten worse, and unless something is done soon, she will die. The group also realizes the dam holding back a metric fuck-ton of irradiated water is on the verge of bursting, so the forest is also a no-go. The group decides to make a detour to the highly irradiated city of Novosibirsk, I hope that's how you say it, where they hope to find a cure for Anna. Despite the risk, Artyom and Miller go into the city alone to look for an antidote. Once entering this city's metro system, they find a boy named Kirill, who was the last human survivor in the entire city. Kirill tells Miller and Artyom that his dad went on a mission to retrieve another map that may show a spot on the surface that isn't irradiated. Miller and Artyom decide to split up, with Miller looking for the map and Artyom looking for the antidote. Artyom finds the cure to AIDS, but is gravely wounded by a mutant and absorbs a large dose of radiation. Artyom, Miller and Kirill escape, but on the return journey, Miller gives Artyom his dose of anti-radiation medicine, which leads to Miller carking it. The rest of the Spartans give Artyom their blood in an emergency blood transfusion. Anna is cured of AIDS thanks to the antidote, and they use the map Miller retrieved to find a perfect place to live just off the shores of Lake Baikal. Artyom's fate here depends on the choices you make on your journey. If you're an asshole throughout the game, Artyom dies. The Spartans and Anna hold a funeral for both him and Miller, whilst your spirits awaken in the Aurora in some sort of purgatory. In the good ending, Artyom lives, and at Miller's funeral, the other Spartans declare you as the leader of a new order. Artyom also decides that he wants to go back to Moscow to tell the truth to the survivors there about the outside world. And yeah, that's the story of Metro Exodus. I honestly think this story is the best out of the Metro games, and both endings send all the characters off very well. My only real complaint is that we don't get to see more about the Dark Ones and what happened to them, because last we heard at the end of Last Light, they set out on a very similar journey to ours. But that being said, I still think the story is amazing on its own. Well, I guess it's time to end the video. Just kidding, I've still got 2 fucking DLCs to cover! Starting off with the 2 Colonels, this DLC is pretty good. It follows the story of Kirill's father, Colonel Khlebnikov, leading up to the downfall of the Novosibirsk Metro and how Kirill became the only survivor in the whole city. Whilst we mostly play as Kirill's dad, we get glimpses of Miller's journey when he was separated from Artyom towards the end of the game. This DLC is much more linear than the base game and is structured more like a Metro mission from the other games. Other than that, the story is good. I think if the story didn't have the time jumps back to the present and just focused on Khlebnikov's story for the full 2 hours of this DLC's runtime, it would have been a lot better. It just feels like these cutscenes with Miller don't really add much to the story, because you really don't get to play as him. Sam's story is the better of the 2 DLCs in my opinion. You see, the DLC is more like the open world levels in the base game. This means there is a lot more to explore and even some new weapons to use and upgrade. The story follows Sam from the base game trying to make his way back to America so that he can be with his dad. Sam travels to the port city of Vladivostok, where he meets a captain named Ed. Ed tells Sam where his old submarine is that he used to be captain of before the war. But as Sam and Ed make their way there, they are separated and Sam is captured by a group of men. It turns out these men are working for another American named Tom. Once they tell Tom of your presence, he is excited to finally talk to someone from America again and treat you as a guest. Tom is also in charge of the submarine and tells you that Ed is the only person that knows how to refuel it and asks you to go find him. Tom also tells you about his plans to use the sub's nukes as a threat to other settlements to force them to join his regime. You eventually find Ed again and convince him to at least talk to Tom and negotiate a deal. After they have a quick chat, you and Ed go to the sub's fuel and head back to Tom. This is where Ed tells you that he has planted an explosive charge on the sub's fuel rods and hands you the detonator. At the end of the DLC, you can choose to blow up the sub with both Tom and Ed inside, putting an end to Tom's plans, or you can decide to not blow the sub up, where Tom will then take you to San Diego as you asked. I definitely think this DLC is better than the 2 Colonels. It feels a lot more fleshed out with a well-rounded vision, and it takes about 4 to 5 hours to beat, making it almost the length of an average FPS campaign. Overall, I think that Metro Exodus is the best of the 3 Metro games. You could tell from the previous 2 games that this level of immersion and storytelling was what they were striving for, but were just barely missing the mark. Anyway, those were my thoughts on Metro Exodus. This video took way longer than it should have because I am still fucking sick, to the point that my nose has so much snot in it that it feels like I'm constantly receiving an angry dragon. And if you know what that is, may God save your soul. Anyway, I also stream on Twitch as well, but I haven't been recently because, yet again, I'm sick. But that's it for today's video. Bye.